On the day Elena moved into apartment 302, Thor the dog barked for 6 hours straight. 3 weeks later, he sat at her door in complete silence. "I'm Caesar. I'm a cat, and I've been watching this building fall apart for 7 years. One eviction. Notice, one noise complaint, one lonely dinner at a time." But then she arrived, with a violin, and somehow, impossibly, she taught us all how to be quiet enough to hear each other. This is the story of the Sunflower Apartments, and how we learned to listen. One day, Elena left a small, perfect chocolate bar in return, the expensive kind from the artisan shop 3 blocks away. No note, no words, just an exchange of quiet gifts, a language of appreciation that transcended speech. Ethan's face, when he found it, lit up like a sunrise. He ran back to his apartment, clutching the chocolate, and that night his light stayed on a little longer. He was drawing again, but this time he wasn't afraid. The scent of Elena's apartment changed to, it was no longer just the smell of fresh paint and old wood. Now it was the smell of Earl Grey tea and cinnamon, of old books, and lemon polish, of a life being carefully, tenderly rebuilt. It was the smell of a home being built, note by note, and we, the residents of the Sunflower Apartments, were all breathing it in. But not all silences are peaceful. I knew Elena's was a shield. One afternoon, I saw her through her window, staring at a photograph. Her shoulders were heavy. The music she played that night was different. It was raw, painful, a melody of loss. It was the sound of a heart remembering a wound. It was the reason she had come to us. She wasn't just playing music. She was healing herself, and in doing so, she was healing us. That wound had a name. Michael. I pieced the story together from fragments: a tearful phone call overheard through a vent, a crumpled letter I saw in her trash, the way her hands would tremble when her phone rang. He was a conductor, a man with a voice like velvet and a will of iron. He had loved her music, then tried to own it, to shape it, to make it his. He had praised her talent in public, then criticized her spirit in private. He'd tell her she was too emotional, that she needed to play with more control, that she needed to listen to him. He had turned her gift into a cage. The silence she brought with her wasn't just peace. It was a fortress she had built after escaping a war, and now she was trying to learn how to live without walls. But healing is not linear. There were days when the music stopped, days when Elena would sit by her window, staring out at the city, her violin untouched. On those days, the building felt heavier. Thor would whine softly. Polly would be unusually quiet. Even Luna would tone down her dramatics. We all felt Italiano. The absence of her music was a presence in itself, a reminder that she was still fighting a battle we couldn't see. One evening, the war found her. It was a Thursday, 7:23 p.m. I was on my windowsill, watching the street below, when I heard her phone ring. The sound was sharp, intrusive, cutting through the gentle melody she had been playing. She stopped mid. I saw her through the window, her body rigid, her face pale. She stared at the phone for 3 rings before answering. The voice on the other end, though muffled, carried the sharp edge of command. It was him. Michael. He was in town. He wanted to see her. Said. Ahead. Concert, a new orchestra, a new life. But that it was all meaningless without her. He claimed he had changed, that he understood now. He was asking for just one conversation. The classic predator's gambit, professing need while asserting power, promising change while demanding compliance. I heard her voice break as she told him no, that he didn't get to do that anymore, that she wasn't that person she used to be. She pleaded for him to just leave her alone. Her words came in fragments, each one a struggle against old patterns, old fears. And in that silence, the old fears crept back in. The next morning, I saw her packing one of her 2 boxes. The violin case was closed, latched shut like a coffin. The plant, her little succulent, that had finally started to thrive was left by the window, forgotten. She was going to run again, to find another apartment, another city, another temporary refuge. The building held its breath. Thor whined softly outside her door, scratching at the wood with his paw. Polly was uncharacteristically quiet, her head tucked under her wing. Even Charlie stopped his statistical analysis. We all felt Italiano, the music was about to stop, and with it, the fragile hope we had all started to build. But a fortress, once a bridgehead, can be defended by others. Devoin 402, Ethan, perhaps sensing the shift in the building's fragile peace, slipped a new drawing under her door. He had been working on it all night. His mother told me later. It was different from the others. This one showed Elena not just playing her violin, but holding it like a shield, like a sword, like a source of light. Around her, all of us, Polly, myself, Charlie, Luna, Dizzy, were sheltered from a tall, dark shadow in the background. The shadow had no face, but its presence was menacing, and Elena, small but fierce, was standing between us and it. He had drawn her as our protector, but more than that, he had drawn her as someone worth protecting, someone who belonged. Sometimes, the smallest voices are the ones that win wars. Elena looked at the drawing for a long time. She traced the outline of herself with her finger, then the outline of each of us. She looked at the violin in the drawing, held high like a banner. Then she looked at her own violin case, closed and silent. She slowly stood up, walked to the door, and opened Italiano. Thor was there, looking up at her with worried, golden eyes. His tail gave a hesitant wag. She knelt down, and for the first time, touched him. She stroked his head, ran her fingers through his soft, golden fur. He licked her hand, a gentle, affirming gesture. It was a pact, a promise. She was not alone. She had never been alone. She had just forgotten how to see it. From the hallway, I heard a soft sound. It was Ethan, peeking out from his apartment door. Elena looked up and saw him. Their eyes met. She smiled, a real, genuine smile, and mouthed the words, "Thank you." Ethan's face broke into a grin. He gave a small, shy wave, then disappeared back into his apartment. But the connection had been made. The message had been received. She closed the door, unpacked her box, and picked up her violin. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight, its familiarity. Then she opened the case and lifted the instrument to her chin. But she didn't stay in her apartment. She walked to the small balcony, the one that overlooked the courtyard, the one where everyone could see her. She was not hiding anymore. She was not running. She was standing her ground. And she was going to play. Not for Michael. Not for the past. But for herself. And for us, transformation is a quiet process. You don't notice it until you look back. The building was different. The angry neighbor stopped banging on the walls. The lonely dinners became less frequent as people started gathering in the small, shared garden. The building manager, a woman who communicated primarily through sternly worded memos, was seen smiling at the boy from 402. And it all seemed to revolve around the quiet woman in 302. Nate's Pet Supply is more than a store. It's a confessional, a community center, a place where the neighborhood gathers not just to buy kibble, but to share their lives. Nate, a man with a kind face, gentle hands, and perpetually flour on his apron from the organic dog biscuits he bakes in the back, knows all our secrets. He knows that Luna only eats salmon pate, served on a porcelain dish. He knows that Charlie has a gluten allergy and requires a very specific brand of grain-free food. He knows that Thor is secretly afraid of squirrels, despite being 10 times their size. And he knows the stories behind each of us, the loneliness, the loss, the small, quiet hopes. It was at Nate's that Elena truly became one of us, not just a resident of the Sunflower Apartments, but a member of the community. When Elena mentioned she was looking for catnip, Nate smiled knowingly. He said, "I was a connoisseur who only accepted the finest quality." Elena laughed, admitting, she was trying to win me over, that I was clearly a tough critic. Nate chuckled and said I was the guardian of the building and that she had clearly passed the test. He mentioned how the whole building felt different since she arrived lighter somehow. Another customer agreed, saying her Winston hadn't growled at the mailman in a week, a miracle she attributed to Elena's music. She confessed it calmed her down too, especially during the rough patch she'd been going through. The violin was like a reminder that beauty still existed. Someone else mentioned their cat Mittens, who used to hide under the bed all day, but now sat by the window, listening. It was like she'd come back to life. Elena said softly that she was glad, but Nate insisted it was more than that. He told her she'd reminded them they were a neighborhood, not just a collection of addresses, that they were connected, that they mattered to each other. He said it was a rare gift and offered her a lavender sachet for her apartment, insisting it was on the house, a thank you from all of them. Elena protested that she couldn't accept it, but Nate was firm. It was their way of saying thank you. Elena left the store with tears in her eyes. Good tears, the kind that come from being seen, from being valued. She walked back to the Sunflower, apartments with the catnip, the lavender sachet, and a new pot for her now thriving succulent. The plant had tripled in size, its leaves plump and green. It was a survivor, host-like, and it was thriving, just like she was starting to. That evening, she knocked on my door. My human, a quiet woman who works from home, opened it. Elena held out the bag of catnip, saying it was for Caesar, that she'd heard I was a connoisseur. My human laughed and invited her in. They talked for an hour, two humans connecting over their shared love of their feline companions. And I, of course, enjoyed the catnip. It was, indeed, the finest quality. The climax of our quiet revolution came on a warm summer evening. 3 months after Elena had moved in, the building was having its annual, usually awkward, community meeting in the small, shared garden. It was a modest space, with a few benches, some struggling rose bushes, and a single, ancient oak tree. The building manager, a stern woman named Ms. Rodriguez, was trying to talk about the new recycling rules. But the air was thick with unspoken tensions about a proposed rent increase, 15%, a number that felt like a punch to the gut for many of the residents. People were shifting in their plastic chairs, avoiding eye contact, their faces tight with worry. It was the usual story, a group of people living inches apart, but miles away from each other, strangers bound by proximity, not by choice then, as if on cue. A fuse blew. The single string of lights illuminating the garden flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. A collective groan went through the crowd, followed by a nervous murmur. Someone dropped a glass, the sound of shattering echoing in the sudden quiet. A child started to cry. The tension was no longer unspoken. It was a palpable, anxious presence, thick enough to choke on. Ms. Rodriguez fumbled for her phone, trying to use it as a flashlight. People started to stand up, ready to leave, to retreat back to their separate, isolated apartments. But before the complaints could find a voice, before the meeting could dissolve into chaos, a different sound emerged from the darkness. A single, clear, perfect note from Elena's violin. It hung in the air, a beacon in the blackness. She stood on her small balcony, a silhouette against the moonlit sky. She hadn't planned this. She had simply responded to the darkness with the only light she knew how to create. She lifted her violin to her chin and she played. Not Vivaldi, not Bach, not any of the classical masters, but a simple, hopeful melody that felt like it was written for that very moment. For us, it was a tune that spoke of finding light in the dark, of finding harmony in the discord, of finding connection in the isolation. It was a tune that said, "You are not alone. We are here." Together, one by one, the residents fell silent. They stopped moving. They stopped worrying about the rent, about the broken lights, about the thousand small anxieties that filled their days. They look up. The boy from 402, Ethan, was already at his window, watching, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. His mother, still in her hospital scrubs, came to stand beside him, her hand on his shoulder. The lawyer from 301, David, Thor's owner, stepped out onto his balcony, his phone forgotten in his hand. Thor was beside him, sitting calmly, his tail wagging gently. David looked down at his dog, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in months. He knelt down and stroked Thor's head. He whispered an apology, saying he'd been a terrible owner, promising to do better. Even Luna, the dramatic son, was a quiet statue on her windowsill, her usual theatrics replaced by a rare, genuine stillness. Charlie sat beside her, for once not offering statistics or analysis. Daisy blinked slowly, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. Mrs. Henderson stood on her balcony, Polly perched on her shoulder. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered to Herbert, asking if he could hear it, saying it was beautiful. Polly nuzzled her cheek and whistled softly, a perfect, mournful note. Windows opened all over the building. People stepped out onto their own balconies, drawn by the music like moths to a flame. The angry neighbor from 4B, a man who had complained about every noise for the past 5 years, stood quietly, his arms crossed, a small smile on his face. The young couple from 2A, who were always fighting, stood side by side, their hands intertwined. My human and myself, we all gathered, a constellation of lonely souls, united by a single melody. For the first time, we were not a collection of separate apartments defined by our walls, our locks, our isolation. We were an audience. We were a community. We were listening. Together. And in that moment, the rent increase didn't matter. The broken lights didn't matter. The struggles, the loneliness, the fear, it all faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was the music, and the woman who was brave enough to play it. The woman who had reminded us that we were not alone. When the music stopped, there was a moment of profound silence. A silence that was different from the usual, isolated quiet of the building. This was a shared silence, a collective breath held in awe. Then, applause. It started with Ethan, clapping from his window, his small hands making a surprisingly loud sound. Then David joined in. Then Mrs. Henderson, 10 everyone. A wave of applause that echoed through the courtyard, bouncing off the brick walls, filling the air with appreciation and gratitude. It was not polite applause. It was heartfelt, genuine, a standing ovation for a woman who had given them a gift they didn't even know they needed. Elena, on her balcony, looked surprised, almost shy. She lowered her violin, her cheeks flushed. She bowed slightly, a small, graceful gesture. And then she smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up her face. It was the smile of someone who had found her way home. The lights came back on. A few minutes later, the fuse mysteriously fixed by someone in the crowd. But the magic of that moment lingered. It hung in the air, like the scent of her music, a reminder that beauty and connection were still possible, even in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. After that night, things changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly, steadily, like the turning of seasons. David started coming home earlier. He took Thor for longer walks, played fetch in the park, even enrolled him in a training class. Thor, in turn, became calmer, happier, more confident. He stopped barking at shadows. He learned to trust. Ethan's mother, inspired by the community meeting, started a small book club in the garden. A few residents gathered once a week to discuss novels, drink tea, and share their lives. Ethan joined them, reading aloud from his favorite graphic novels. He was no longer afraid of the dark, or of being alone. He had found his people. Mrs. Henderson started volunteering at the local animal shelter, bringing Polly along to cheer up the animals. Polly, Everett the performer, loved the attention. She learned new words, new songs, and even started mimicking the barks of the shelter dogs. She was, in her own way, healing. And Elena, she continued to play. Not every day, but often enough. She started giving free violin lessons to Ethan, teaching him the basics, nurturing his love of music. She joined the book club, contributed to the community garden, and became a fixture in the neighborhood. She was no longer running. She was rooted. She was home. Elena didn't solve anyone's problems. She didn't lower the rent or fix the faulty wiring. She didn't make the world outside any less harsh or complicated. She just tuned douce. She reminded us of our shared humanity, our capacity for connection, our need for beauty, and sometimes that's enough to change the weight of a day, to make the unbearable a little more bearable, to make the lonely a little less alone. Dull, transform a building into a home. I still watch from my window. I still keep our stories. But now, the stories are different. They are stories of open doors, of shared cups of sugar, of drawings taped to refrigerators. They are stories of Mrs. Henderson teaching Ethan how to bake cookies, his small hands covered in flour, his laughter filling the kitchen. They are stories of David taking Thor to the park more often, throwing the ball until his arm aches, watching his dog run with pure, unbridled joy. There are stories of neighbors helping each other carry groceries, of impromptu dinners in the garden, of birthday parties and holiday celebrations. They are stories of a community that learned to listen, and of a dog who learned the beauty of silence, and of a woman who learned that she was never truly alone, and of a cat who learned that sometimes the best stories are the ones that have happy endings. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Elena's arrival, the building threw a party in the garden. There was food, music, laughter. Elena played her violin, of course. But this time, she wasn't alone. Ethan joined her on a small keyboard, his fingers stumbling over the keys, but his heart in every note. David brought Thor, who sat calmly at Elena's feet. A picture of peace. Mrs. Henderson and Polly provided commentary, Polly squawking cheerfully about good music, very good, and that Herbert approves. Even Charlie and Luna put aside their differences and sat side by side, watching the festivities with feline approval. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, I looked around at the faces of my neighbors. They were smiling, laughing, connected. They were no longer strangers. They were a family. An imperfect, messy, beautiful family. And it was all because one woman had the courage to play a single note in the darkness. My name is Caesar. I am a Persian cat. I am the keeper of stories, and I live in a building that learned to listen. The Sunflower Apartments, a place where very little light used to grow, but now it blooms. It blooms with music, with laughter, with love. And it all started with a woman named Elena, a violin that held her heart, and a single, courageous note that changed everything. This is our story, and it's far from over, because every day, new notes are played, new connections are made, new stories are written. And I, Caesar, will be here to witness them all, from my perch on the windowsill. Watching, listening, remembering, because that's what keepers of stories do. We remember so that the light never fades.